being able to apply your academics is a big deal. And I think we love it when our students get to take whatever our subject area is. Mine was English, and they get to go and apply that in some way in the world and get to see their work published or see it affect some part of their community. There's an empowerment to that can really lift kids up and give them some vision for what their life could be.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, so if you're an educator, author, or simply somebody who refuses to accept the status quo, this episode is for you. On today's episode of Authors on Mission, we're going to be exploring the future of learning with a thought leader in the field and getting a masterclass in what it takes to build a movement through the power of the written word. Ryan Steuer is the founder of Magnify Learning, an organization dedicated to transforming education through project-based learning. He's a theorist, but he's also a practitioner who has seen the incredible impact of PBL firsthand. And now he's the host of the PBL Simplified podcast. And we are so excited to have him on to chat about himself, his podcasts, and all of his work. So without further ado, Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, Danielle, thanks for having me. It's an honor. Glad to be here with your audience, you and your audience.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah, of course, of course. I think you have a really fun story, a great path that you've taken, and obviously everybody can learn from what you've done here today. I mean, the idea of transforming education, whether or not we're in the school system, we all are, impacted by it. So it's great that you kind of, are kind of reforming things and giving people a new perspective. But before we dive into that, I think let's talk about yourself a little bit. Before we started recording, you mentioned you actually travel full-time in an RV. That's super exciting, and I'm sure it impacts your viewpoints on a lot of this stuff. So tell us a little bit about that. What's it like, and how does that shape your day-to-day experiences?
Yeah, sure. Lots of fun. So it shapes our day-to-day quite a bit. So like when you mentioned, hey, where are you tuning in from? So sometimes I have to think about it, right? So
Yeah.
my family and I, we've got 5 kids, beautiful wife, and we travel around the country, and we tend to hit national parks, visit schools along the way, of course. That's the business side of things, and we get to see a lot of different places. So my kids' favorite places are like the Tetons, like Banff up in Canada, Yellowstone, all the different national parks. And so they're getting a really fun education, very active and outdoor education as well.
That's amazing. So you kind of are practice what you're preaching in a way by allowing your children
Yeah.
this experience to travel and learn in that way. So I can only imagine. I mean, I'm assuming, PBL, you're implementing not only, showing it to schools that you travel to, but your children as well. Is that correct? They're kind of like living the practice.
Yeah, 100%. So everything we do is project-based learning. It's real world. My one son, he's got a YouTube channel called Better Birders, and he talks about how to go out and bird and find different species of birds.
Wow.
And he's doing really well with that. My other son edits podcasts. He actually edits my podcast. And my daughter's got a podcast as well. So everybody has some kind of a project brewing and going that's out in the real world. It's published somewhere, and it can be viewed by the rest of the world. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yes, that's really awesome to think that, your children are learning, but also kind of making an impact in the world and getting their names out there at a young age rather than just kind of sitting in a classroom and memorizing fact after fact. They're applying it. So that's incredible. I'm a teacher myself, and I'm not podcasting or ghostwriting or editing. So I know what it's like to see, kids actually engaging with something
Yeah.
and doing something meaningful. So that's incredible. But yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
hey,
Yeah, I think being able to apply your academics is a big deal. So that's probably where my passion is, right? Like I love teachers. I was a teacher. We support teachers. And I think we love it when our students get to take whatever our subject area is. Mine was English, and they get to go and apply that in some way in the world and get to see their work published or see it affect some part of their community. there's an empowerment to that uh, that can really lift kids up and give them some vision for what their life could be.
Understood. And I guess it's kind of, kind of transition into PBL itself, to give people, the children, a different perspective on what their life could be. I understand you kind of launched it in an underperforming urban school to start off of. So tell us a little about that. What challenges did you face? What was the outcome? How did that work out?
Yeah, so in high school, I was a good student. I had a 4.2 grade point average, right? So I took weighted courses. I was a three-sport athlete. Um, then I started teaching eighth grade English on the southwest side of Indianapolis, and I just didn't honestly. I didn't know that there were kids out there that the education system was failing them, and they didn't care about education. I just thought it was a great thing, honestly. I'm not sure that it showed me like my vision and passion personally. So I had kids that, would get 20% for the entire 9 weeks. They just wouldn't turn anything in. They were living in generational poverty. So like their parents didn't see value in education. So they didn't either. So it wasn't even that they were against education. It was just completely apathetic in a lot of ways. So I had a student that dropped out his first semester of his freshman year. And I was like, I didn't even know that was legal. I didn't know you could do that. Right. So, but I was like, that's not why I moved from engineering to teaching, was to see that. So that was kind of a big wake up call for me that something needed to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, understood. So that's interesting how you kind of went from the role of a teacher to the, like I say, the curriculum designer or the theorist yourself. It must have been an interesting shift. Before we talk about the book itself, I'm curious to know, like, what kind of steps do you take from going from teacher to, actually creating these things? It must have been a little bit of a challenge for you.
Sure, great question. Really the same process is I lived it out, right? So I taught traditionally for half my career, and then I taught with project-based learning the other half. And when I was using project-based learning, we had a school within a school. So half of these, or a quarter of these 951 middle schoolers got project-based learning. And we saw attendance go up 1.5%. We saw 8% of the discipline with 25% of the kids. And in an F school, we would have been a B in standardized tests. So it's like, wow, like this is working, right? So we did that and it worked dramatically from day one. So then it was like, well, how do we share this with others? So we started sharing with other teachers across the state. And then eventually that grew into other states that maybe said, hey, what are you guys doing? So it kind of naturally evolved into a business and into a book and into the training processes we do now, just because it seemed to work.
Yeah, and not just on grades, but also I understand by looking at materials, also on attendance, behavior, achievement in general. So that must have been really just rewarding to see it happen and continue to happen. That's incredible. But
Uh,
then I guess at some point you decided you have to write a book about it, right? So was there a
yeah,
certain catalyst that made you decide to put it down into the written word?
yeah, great question. I think there were two things that happened for me. Is we were training people, and there were some people that just couldn't make it to a training. Maybe their school wouldn't send them, or maybe the school didn't have the funds at the time. It's like, well, how do they get the information? It's like, well, a book would do that, right? So here's a $15 option, and you can start your first project-based learning unit, and you can really get started. The other
Mm.
was, as we were training people, sometimes the shift from a traditional classroom to a project-based learning student-centered classroom it's a big lift for people, like as far as mindset. So getting people in the right mindset before they get to a training was also a big deal. And having the book get ahead of a training was really, really helpful. So people could read through the stories, they could read through the skill sets. There's a win story, a fail story, and a place to start for every chapter. I thought that was important because it's not perfect, right? I didn't want to paint this picture that everything is magically perfect with PBL, but if you keep learning, you keep iterating, you have a growth mindset, then you do end up with some really great outcomes. So the book has really helped kind of jumpstart that idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm glad to see that it kind of was a launch pad for you. I talk to a lot of authors every day,
Yeah.
up to like 350 at this point. Everyone has a different reason for writing.
Wow.
And for you, it was, yeah, but some people, they write because they have an idea for a book or a story to tell, but you is a launch pad. That's really interesting. That it's a different medium for kind of amplifying your ideas. Something that, of course, books are a great way to do it, but in this sense, it's practical and like in the moment, I can imagine you probably hand out these books to other teachers, curriculum designers, principals, superintendents, that sort of thing. Is that kind of how you put it to use now? Just out of
Yep.
curiosity.
100%. Yeah. So it's a great way as an introduction to the work that we do. Here's what we
Mhm.
believe in. So if somebody's wondering, it's a great place to start. Because if you're going to do some kind of a training as a school, like you said, if a principal wants to jump in, they really want to know kind of who they're jumping in with. And actually, we were working with a school in Maryland, and the assistant superintendent had kind of lined everything up, and so we sent the books ahead of time. They read them, and that was a training that I did. And he actually said, you know how you read with a certain voice in your head, you kind of get the picture of the author, and he's like, you just seem like that. Like, this is exactly what I thought you'd be like. It's like, well, that's
Wow.
great, Scott. Thanks. So, kind of my voice I think that's the neat thing about being an author, right? Is you get to put your voice in there. You get to tell the stories in your specific way. And I think that's a really special piece that can, obviously it goes across states and goes across countries even. So it's neat.
Absolutely. And that's so fascinating to think about because authors, voice is huge when it comes to being an author and
Yeah.
writing your own book. But when somebody can actually say like, "Hey, you're exactly who I pictured you being when they meet you in person," that's just so amazing to feel. It's really
Yes.
warm, like you're making connection with people before you even meet them. So it's a
Yes.
great business tactic too. I mean, of course, this has a huge, you know, movement behind it, what you're doing with PBL, but in terms of any other authors listening today, that just goes to show if you're using a book as your business card, as a credibility piece, whatever it might be, the better you put your own voice and authentic stories in there is how we get it out. So amazing.
I think so. And I
Yeah.
think, I don't know if this is a tip or whatever. I'm happy to go wherever you want, but wouldn't it be odd if I showed up for a training and that same assistant superintendent was like, "Oh, I thought you were going to be different," because I
Mm,
used a more professional voice than what I would typically use, right? I'm pretty informal. I try to use humor. I use a lot of stories. So wouldn't it be odd if he was like, "Oh, I thought you would be more, more academic and more kind of PhD-ish," which is not really my vibe, right? So it was, I guess that would be an encouragement to just let your natural voice come out in your book because, when you get to meet somebody in person, whether it's a training or otherwise, you kind of want that to match, I think.
right, exactly. And yeah, I can see what you mean. Like it can be misleading if it's, written otherwise, and that's not the persona you're trying to get across. You're not trying to be somebody who's, some corporate, CEO, super fancy using jargon all over the place. Like you're trying to get down their level. Like I've been there. I was a
Yeah.
teacher. I know what it's like, and I've seen this work better. So that's exactly what you need to think about when you're writing. I love that. Did you have any certain tips or tricks that you use to capture your own voice in writing? Like some people find that challenging to do. Was that the case for you?
Oh, it wasn't for me. I started with a lot of presentations probably. So I like to, if I have a new idea, I like to go to a conference and present it. That's just how I kind of get ideas out. I'll make some slides, I'll tell some stories and like, oh, I really like that story. I thought that went well. Or I can see that it relates with people in the audience. That's
Mhm.
really helpful for me. It's tricky as an author or as as a podcaster, you kind of put a podcast out and like you don't always hear anything. So it's like, how are we doing? But a presentation lets me see when somebody laughs at a certain joke or when they take notes at a certain point. So then it lets me know it's really important to the audience. So that was helpful for me, is just getting out to present and then taking those ideas that really landed. Those are the ones that made it into the book.
Absolutely. So, okay, so kind of just drawing from those experiences too, and kind of like the feedback they get from others, in a way, I guess you could say. So, yeah, I can only imagine that must have been like a kind of a tiresome process then, kind of going back and forth between your stories and feedback. And then, of course, I mean, whether or not you were still traveling at the time, I'm sure there's a whole factor for the writing process as well. So, what was the day to day like for you as you were creating this book? That's something I always like to ask
Um,
authors. It's something we don't always think about.
yeah, it's a great question because I mean, when you first start writing a book, it's really mysterious, right? You maybe have some favorite authors and maybe you've heard their process or maybe you haven't. So like, is there fancy software? And I really like John Acuff as an author that I follow. And he's like, no, it's just me and Microsoft Word. And I've got to get words on the page. And so that was my process. I just got up an hour earlier than I normally would. And
Mm.
that was my time to write. I didn't do anything else. I didn't check email, text. It was just writing. And for me, that was really helpful to just kind of knock that out. I heard somebody say that they listened to the same song over and over again. So I did that. I really appreciated that.
Okay.
So I wasn't like getting into the song, but I knew that song just meant writing. So when that song came on, and it was literally on repeat for hours and hours and hours, and that worked for me. So
Yeah, I mean, you got to figure out what works best for you. I mean, I don't know if I could listen to the same song over and over without being too distracted. Maybe some like nice lo-fi just kind of blends into the background for
Yeah.
me. But I see what you mean. Like maybe it's useful. Maybe it's something that works for you, and how you got to try out every step until you figure out what clicks. I get that. So yeah, amazing. But now that the book is out, you've actually expanded into a podcast, which is super cool, and other content channels as well. So tell us a little bit about that. How are you using this book as like a springboard, which you mentioned before, to spread the message? How's it going for you? And tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, sure. It's great. It's the other thing that's great about a book is it really helps you have to kind of narrow a lot of your ideas to really match your audience. So project-based learning is
Right.
often seen as something that's complicated or difficult.
Hmm.
So the title of the book is PBL Simplified. And then I go and explain that it's not watered down, it's just simplified, right? And so then the podcast is the same name and then same title of a YouTube series. I've got a 52 part YouTube series that you can get one email a week. You get one video every week. And same
Okay.
idea. So, you go to pblsimplified.com and you can go sign up. And so it really helped me just kind of almost just have this phrase that I could use at any time. Like right now, if you go to pblsimplified.com, you can sign up if you're a teacher or you're an administrator and you can get free resources, right? So it just kind of helped me build in kind of this talk that I'm always ready to give. You could kind of hear it kick in, right? It's like, go to PBL Simplified. That's where my work's at, right? And then I assume if you put that into Google, you could find the podcast, the YouTube channel, the book study. All those things are kind of in that idea. And so the connection of all those, I think, has really been helpful in growing that part of the brand.
Absolutely. And I think that's something a lot of authors can, model after you as well. You might write a book, but then if you just kind of put it on the shelves and hope people are going to find it, well, most likely they're not going to. You need to have these other mediums in order to do so and to spread that engagement. So, very clever on your end. I love that. And thank you for telling us the link too, so we can kind of go and check out. And everyone listening today, I mean, whether you're a teacher or an administrator, hey, click on the link and find out more about it. It's excellent. It's a great strategy. So yeah, perfect. So we chatted a little bit about your podcast, about the book, about a little bit the voice and the writing process. But yeah, let's segue back into PBL a little bit too, because in my opinion, I mean, PBL is important because it helps students be more engaged with their writing, with their work, right, and to learn a little bit more, to have more authentic learning experiences. But would you argue, and I'm curious to know, could that be also applied to adults as well? Maybe something
Oh,
not just children, but I'm thinking like even like the authors listening today or busy entrepreneurs, whatever it might be. I'm sure that this kind of thing might help them too. What do you think? Have you considered that?
oh, I think so. I think we assume that adults probably do it, right? You've got this obstacle at your job or your business. So then you have to go research, you have to find possible solutions, you have to pick one, you have to try them out, and you have to reflect on it. So that's kind of the
Mhm.
PBL process, right? In a nutshell, right? And I think we, I think where the PBL process could help is knowing that that's the process we all go through when we solve problems, right? So if you could do that intentionally, I think those roadblocks look a lot smaller, right? Let's say you're getting ready to self publish. You say, well, I'd love to self publish, but I don't know anything about it. Okay, great. Who does? Right. And then what do you need to know? So write down all the questions you need to know. Now you're going to start the research process. How do you self publish? And you go through those processes. Then you pick one way, you go and you publish. Then you decide how did it go. Right. So I think what I love about project based learning at any level, like you said, it works with adults as well, is that there's a growth mindset attached to it. It's like there's no blockade, like there's no blockage in my way. There might be a problem that needs to be solved. Well, I've got a process for that, right? We just walk through those steps.
Understood. And so I guess, being that you used publishing as an example, is that sort of the process you used to decide between self-publishing and working with a publisher for your book?
So I did both. So I've got
Okay.
two books. I self-published the first one through Amazon, say KDP, and also did the audio of that book as well. Actually, I
Okay.
paid somebody to do that. Um, and then the second one I did with a more traditional publisher who's technically hybrid, so I still own the rights to all the words. And then I did the audio for that one. And so I wanted to experience both of those. I think in my genre, in my world, and how I use the book, I would probably go back to self-publishing. I like the control of it. I like the ease of the next edition and those types of things. But happy to answer. answer any questions around that. But yeah, so I've done both. Again, I just wanted to know what they were both like. And there's pros and cons to both, I think. I think going through a traditional publisher did teach me about some of the professionalism maybe in the industry of I had a great editor for that book. And what's the process for getting the cover design and those types of things. So fascinating. Like both were helpful. Happy to answer any questions if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it seems like you have pros and cons for both, sides of it. But I guess in general, like, do you have a certain recommendation for one type of publishing than the other? Or, what might you
I,
advise for somebody for the first time going in? What do you think?
yeah, I think the bar for self-publishing is just, I say this in the most positive way, it's so low, but you can just publish and go for it, like on KDP. So I like that method. It seems like going with a traditional publisher is that there's just so many more steps, and publishing is hard enough, to get your book done. I think a good editor is really important.
Mm.
I like,
Yeah,
um,
you did mention that, yeah.
yeah, I think the editor is super helpful in just finding that passive voice that you might use, or those things that maybe you don't know about that are in your writing. I still get Grammarly every time I go to write a book. I'm writing another book right now. So I go and grab Grammarly just so it's on there. I can get some easy stuff off. But having an editor, you know, and I don't remember if we put $1,500 into an editor, maybe, just to attack that. Like I personally, like passive voice is something apparently I write in all the time because there was just red marks all over. Like needs to be active voice, but those are things I didn't know, right? So for me, that was super helpful in finding the editor. But my encouragement is to self-publish and get the book out there. And you're still going to have to market either way. Because some way you have to let people know about your book. That's the hardest part of being an author, I think. Um, but I like self-publishing just because of the ease getting it out there.
Understood. Okay, I like that. Yeah, I mean, at least get the book out there, right? No waiting, no like, rejection games. Just get something out there with your name, and then maybe dabble with, traditional publishers later on. Or you could think about a hybrid publisher. Like some of them are a little bit of both. Like you have the big name and also like, a little bit of freedom. That's something that we do here at Authors on Mission. Actually, we're kind of like a mesh of the two. So,
Oh,
kind of weigh your options, guys, right? I mean, figure out what's best for you. And totally agree with what you mean by the editor. You need to make sure you have somebody who cares about your work, sees your vision, your style, and points out those things like the passive voice that you just don't know about yourself, or maybe you're so close to manuscript you don't notice it either. So second pair of eyes is always incredible. But yeah, I mean, now that you have the book out, the podcast going, anything else we could be looking forward to in the future? Any upcoming projects that people should be staying up to date with?
I am excited about, I don't know if we're going to call them micro books or mini books. But instead of like a 40,000 word book that goes to your traditional publisher, we're thinking like 10 to 20 on smaller topics. So for us, it's like a principal might be interested in community partners, entry event, presentations. That's some of our geeky jargon, but just a small book on each one of those. Like, what do you really need to know about that? I'm not going to include a whole bunch of, there'll be stories, but it's something you could pick up and read maybe in an hour, right? Or something you would reference instead of having to remember it's page 136. You would just grab that book, flip through it, and then find what you needed. So that's what I'm excited about. I think John Gordon's got that kind of style, some parables of like smaller books, and I really like that, just kind of that anthem of small books. So that's the direction I'm going to go.
I like that. And especially in today's busy, day and age, sometimes you need something just quick that people can pick up. They're looking for a specific, resource or piece of advice. So, there you go. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
There's a little quick bit. So that's great. Well, I guess you can kind of stay up to date by checking out, was it the same links that you mentioned before, perhaps, or a different link that we should be connecting
Um,
to find out information?
yeah, PBLSimplified.com would certainly work. If you're interested, like what is PBL.com is another URL that we have that takes you to some similar information. All of that's free. You want to check out kind of some of the things we're doing. If you can't tell, like I like URLs. So I don't know if somebody has a business, they get a book, you can always point the URL right back to your business website. So, for $13 a year, we got PBL Simplified. They're like, well, that's the title of my book. Like that's super cool. And I can point it wherever I want it to go. So any of those would work. We'd appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, well, great. Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing everything. Guys, you heard it right here. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast. So click on over, get connected. Ryan, do you have any other tips or tricks or advice, kind of like a closing thought for the audience today as we begin to wrap things up? What do you think?
Danielle, I think for your audience, I would just encourage them to keep listening to this podcast. Like, figure out what other people are doing and don't do a comparison trap, but just pick one little thing here, one little thing there. I mean, you've got so many different authors that are coming on. Grab a couple tips and tricks here, try some things, see what works for you, and then don't do it alone. Like I would say, engage with you and however they can, like, but get the book published, right? Get the book published. And we've helped a couple of teachers publish their books just um, as part of our process. And there's something freeing about taking that big manuscript and just getting it out there. Now, granted, a lot of work starts at that point because now you have to market the book and people have to know about the book, but it's there, it's tangible, it's exciting. So just encourage your audience to be encouraged and get that book published.
I like that. And thank you for that. And you're exactly right, guys. I mean, you got to figure out what's best for you. You got to get your word out there. You can't let things delay you. I mean, clearly Ryan did it. He had a passion, he had a mission. He made it happen just to act as a launch pad for PBL and for, to change everywhere. So perfect. Well, this has been quite a pleasure. It's been great to meet you and to learn more about you and your mission, your drive. Guys, if you're inspired today, check out all the links. We're going to put them in the description box today. And until next time, just, if you're inspired, just know the world needs your voice. It needs your story. So keep writing, keep teaching, keep pursuing your mission with relentless dedication. And when you do the work that matters, you create a legacy that lasts. So until next time, everybody, stay bold and keep magnifying your missions. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.